Our final writer tonight is Gint Aras, and I don't really know where to start. We've heard him once before. He read from his novel, The Fugue, and I'm not going to read his bio, but I added this to your the very short bio you gave me. A Chicago Tribune reviewer, Dmitry Samarov, called it a magisterial novel, and that it is. I don't think he has it with him here tonight.
I don't, unfortunately.
You can find it on Kindle on Amazon, of course, or from Volumes Book Cafe in downtown, or anywhere, yes. Gint Aras.
Hello, Batavia. Thank you for having me. Enormous gratitude and thanks to Anne for having me back here again to Water Street Studios for this fantastic event, and for this venue, which is just an absolute pleasure to read in, and to all of you people for coming on a night when concussion sports are being played. You could have chosen to watch people destroy their brains, but instead you came to perhaps cultivate your own, which is noble. I grew up in Cicero in the 70s and 80s among World War II refugees. My parents, my elders, most of my neighbors, the vast majority of the people that belonged to my Catholic parish were World War II refugees who had suffered enormously from a conflict which, by all accounts, and it's impossible to argue against the idea that World War II is a racist conflict. Okay, these were people who had suffered enormously and contributed to my upbringing by simultaneously teaching me the value of things like smoked tongue sandwiches made with rye bread, and your pitiful, disregard for something as beautiful as this morsel of food that someone put on your table, and that you should respect that. But then at the same time, they had really powerful and really intense racist views, which I found to be contradictory for most of my life, specifically given what the Catholic Church taught us, right? Which was that you should love your neighbor. So as a child, I had a hard time dealing with these contradictory energies. And so I decided to write an inquiry. And actually, Anne's introducing the book that I'm writing, which is the title of it is Ghetto Blue Blood: Inquiries of a Racist. I've changed from calling it a memoir to an inquiry. And the reason I did that is because I realized that the central energy in the book is not reminiscence, it's introspection. And this excerpt that I'm going to read here today will probably help you understand why I made that change. I'm going to set this excerpt up, which is about 4 pages long, by telling you a story about what it was like for me to go to college, when I had been raised to think that both race and ethnicity were fixed points. Okay, they were fixed points. There was something about you that made you white or black. There was something about you that made you Polish or Mexican or Puerto Rican or Jewish or whatever it was. And that thing, whatever it was available either in your blood or your DNA or something like that. And when I went to college, when I went to UIC, as a young man of 18 years, I was taught the idea that race is a construct. Now, this changed my life. It changed my understanding of myself, and it changed my understanding of my society. And it also changed the way I started interacting with ideas that occurred to me while I was studying. Once I realized that race was a construct, everything that I had learned about identity became questionable. And I was able to question essentially everything that I had ever learned about what it meant to be me, what it meant to be myself, including the idea that I was raised Lithuanian. My first language is Lithuanian. I was raised among Lithuanian migrants and refugees. And that was this very important thing, this very important part of my identity. Well, but now what is it? What is it? If race is constructed, well, what else is constructed? And I want to use that question to segue into just the middle of this here, right? The question, well, race is constructed. My other questions, what else is constructed? And its desperate variation, what isn't constructed, became compulsions that both aided and perverted perception. I was noticing myself disappearing. I could stand with elders to talk about sport and fishing and feel myself a fraud, hiding a secret the way you'd camouflage targets from marksmen. Though I had no idea what to call this part I should hide, knew only that it felt with intensity and should be protected from assault. The act of hiding it was painful. Sometimes at birthday parties or football parties, I'd withdraw to the bathroom to wash my face with scalding water, and I'd bite down into towels with all the force my jaw could spend. I'd come back to cackle at someone's talk or drink shots of frozen cranberry vodka, a family tradition, but would feel physically exhausted later on, as if I had hauled a load of dirt across town. There's nothing better to crank up this identity shift than a trip abroad, particularly to the old country you've heard so much about. I first visited Lithuania in the summer of 1992, part of an excursion with other members of a Lithuanian folk dance group. We took with us a nearly 2-hour-long dance program to be performed on stages in Vilnius, Kaunas, and a handful of other places. Of course, Lithuania had just come out of a revolution. The first domino in the collapse of the Soviet Union. It had cost lives, and the damaged buildings, trashed cars, and remains of barricades were available in plain view. People were trying to figure out what it meant to live in a new political and economic system, dealing with their own questions of loss and fear. Yet here we were, an amateur ensemble of young Americans, all of us convinced Lithuanians couldn't wait to watch us stage polka routines. Polka routines left over from the mid-1930s. I believed Lithuanians loved their national dance, folk music, and costumes the same way Americans loved Coca-Cola and MASH. In the diaspora, the national costume was vital to Lithuanian identity, right alongside knowledge of the songs, dances, and language. My Lithuanian grammar and songbooks showed pictures of gorgeous blonde Lithuanian country kids sitting under hazelnut trees and dressed in colorful sashes, their baskets full of mushrooms and wild berries. Birdies and squirrels sat so close, you felt the kids could speak to animals. In Vilnius, the first young people my troop saw were teenage thugs, busting faces in packed dirt of our dormitory yard. We had just gotten off the bus from the airport, had not even oriented ourselves to the dorm's elevators and cafeteria. The fist fight was as brutal as any I had witnessed in Cicero, and it lasted a good while, guys coming away with bleeding eyes and mouths. After the scene had cleared, a few thugs sat in the dorm's stairway, one of them wrapping a bleeding fist with strips of dirty cloth torn from a shirt. And the boys planned, in language peppered with Russian swears, to get a bigger band together, best their adversaries next time. And the dorm staff paid no attention to them. In only a few days, virtually every pastoral story I had heard about the old country, every painting and drawing I had ever seen, was obliterated to myth and outright contrivance. I learned I spoke a weird version of Lithuanian, undeveloped since 1945, and I often used English syntax fitted with Lithuanian words. Dozens of my common expressions, never corrected at home or in Lithuanian school, were unfortunate. The word I used for toilet was the equivalent of outhouse. And I said ass when I meant rear, as in, there's an empty seat in the ass of the bus. Or, we can enter the building through its ass. Thank you. Very few people in Lithuania owned any national costumes. They ate far more than dumplings and boletus mushrooms. Young people drank some weird greenish thing called šaltukas, and they liked pizza with eggs baked in the center. For dinner, they fried chicken, stewed vegetables, and made soup by boiling bones. The best meal I had was shashlikai, or shish kebabs, skewered pork grilled over open coals, eaten near a lake outside Dolgai, where I happily got sweaty, drunk, and naked, pink as a steamed grouper, to jump into the cool green water of the lake. Then I spent the night pounding moonshine someone's uncle had made in his garage, fielding questions about whether I had ever ridden in a Cadillac or if I knew Michael Jordan. People were endlessly curious to know if I considered myself American or Lithuanian. Some of these discussions turned into fierce arguments, and there was no pleasant way to answer the inquiries. If I claimed to feel Lithuanian, they'd protest, explain I could never be real, even if I took a Lithuanian passport or moved to Vilnius. If I claimed to feel American, they'd accost me. How could I feel close to a nation of mongrels who had no culture of their own? I realized these people saw themselves as true, and I should have been aspiring to their truth while knowing it's impossible to achieve. America was a construct, but Lithuania remained fixed as the chemical properties of gold. Their identity's truth gave them authority over me, left them authentic, while I remained false. Even if there was ultimately something about the story of American identity they coveted, unaware, I'd been trained to covet a story myself, one falling apart because of my conversations with them. Only the rarest person in Lithuania, a hip aunt and a professional actor who knew my parents, could listen to me wonder about the fluid nature of ethnicity, its construction, its capacity to change and collapse in an instant. The Soviet Union no longer existed, yet its consequences were everywhere, including a cold and rigid mentality that drew lines between people clear as fences between yards. Of course, that mentality was changing as young people felt the freedom to reject it. Their protests took cues from the symbols of alternative identities available in media. Many of these seemed American to me. A young kid thinks, who am I? I'm someone who now chews gum on the public bus and puts his feet up on chairs. I grew up near the Vilnius train station, and I listen to rap music, tag walls, tilt my cap sideways, wear baggy pants, and I ride a skateboard. I wear thick metal necklaces, and I jack my elbows sideways when I talk. It struck me in Vilnius to feel I identified with hip-hop as American, as mine. In Chicago, I enjoyed and admired the music, but would never have claimed possession. And I would never have felt represented by Run DMC or the Beastie Boys. In Lithuania, various forms of pop culture, but especially hip-hop and metal, represented rebellion against Soviet norms and affinities, even if that mentality now revealed itself when cliques of thugs used musical groups to determine friend from foe. The Depeche Mode crew, Depeshiste, battled the Metallica crew, Metalliste. And they went about town crossing out each other's graffiti, occasionally busting faces in courtyards or parks. I met an unfortunate fan of Queen, Kvine, who hated Michael Jackson fans because he thought they were all gay. I could have said to them, you're uninspired and unoriginal. Admittedly, I did get into those kinds of discussions, yet the concept of originality had left me scrambling for footing, because nothing I had learned, no part of the story of identity I had inherited, seemed to hold up anymore. One night, I got accosted by a stranger. We were in Palanga, a resort town on the coast of the Baltic Sea. My dance troupe had completed our performance in an outdoor venue, fewer than half the seats full, and we were presently partying in our dorm, where other young people were staying, mostly on vacation. We naturally attracted attention, loud Americans who rudely bought champagne and beer by the caseload, and said strange things like, the outhouse is in the ass. Exotic, we also disappointed. People had heard so much about Americans, but our bunch offered no Shannon Doherty or Johnny Depp, just students who practiced folk dancing and thought others should care. One wiry guy in a training suit, perhaps in his 20s, didn't bother with any introductions, but just helped himself to beer and vodka, ate bread and sausage, and kept asking for cigarettes. He would open beer bottles by jamming them against windows, and one time used his teeth. The guy learned I was from Chicago and kept pestering me about the Bulls. Why didn't I attend all the matches? Why hadn't I bought Bulls hats and jerseys to sell in Lithuania? We were pretty drunk when he asked me, so, do you consider yourself Lithuanian or American? I'm both, I said. You can't be both. I can, I'm both. That's stupid. It's impossible. It isn't. So, what makes you American? This was unusual. Lithuanians usually started from the Lithuanian end and worked back to prove I was American. Now I was a bit befuddled. I said, I was born there. That doesn't mean you're American. There are Russians born in Vilnius. If my mother had given birth to me in Poland, I would still be Lithuanian. Well, I said, I'm from there. I think like an American. Well, what is that? What are American thoughts? You know, individualism and independence are important to me. So what? Those are myths. And they're important to everyone. Yes, I said, but I'm independent, and I'm an individual. A laugh bellowed out from somewhere deep in his bowels, and the guy looked at me as if I was the most pitiful idiot he had ever seen. How is it possible for you to be independent? I wanted to tell him I support myself, but my Lithuanian stumbled. I ended up saying, or susimoku, I pay my way. You pay? Really? He poured about 100 grams of vodka into a beer glass and pushed it toward me, right to the edge of the table. And where do you get money? I work. Ha! He shouted, raising his glass. You mean you're a slave to some pizdukas? Some pizdukas owns what? A store? Where do you work? I quit before the trip. I used to drive pizzas. What freedom! You drove pizzas for some pizdukas? So you're an independent American who pays his way. Blat, let's drink. We shot down the warm vodka. Today, I learned we're all Americans. Tomorrow I'll get my American passport. I'll bring the embassy receipts to show all I've purchased. Well, what's all this to you? Why do you care who I am or what I think? He said he didn't give a fuck. Man pochui. America didn't matter to him. Bibideo and tavo Americos. The guy took a bottle from the table and pressed my shoulder to stand up. You don't have to convince anyone you're American, he said. The stupidity gives it away. You can't tell propaganda from a panda. So congratulations, American. So congratulations, American. You're the dumbest person I've ever met in my life. And after that, I never saw him again. Thanks.